But yeah, thank you everyone for attending and joining us here on this luscious tropical island. We thought about doing it in the day, but it's at least it's nighttime now where I am. So I'm based in Turkey, and my name is Michael Barngrover. Some of you are from some of my communities. Our communities that I'm active in are the XR Crowd and Your Immersive. These are two European oriented communities in the creative space and the enterprise space. And I've been leading for a number of years now, basically since the start of the pandemic lockdowns. I was leading a series of events called Zero Events, where we explored all of these social VR and multi-user VR platforms to validate them for virtual events and for remote team working. And I was able to do that and was kind of ready to do that because that's my area of interest and research is collaboration in VR. So I'm a PhD student. I'm a really bad one, but I'm a much better person to lead industry research and discussions because I'm someone who likes to get my hands dirty and be rather practical. And today's discussion is going to be practice-based. There's a lot of theory about how people could work in VR. But of course, the reality is people are working in VR, doing it in different capacities, using it in different use cases, and obviously using a range of tools. And Engage is one of those platforms that for a few years has been one of those tools in the tool belt that sometimes it makes sense to do stuff in here. Other platforms similarly have kind of found their niche, if not widely adopted niches. At least they found their niche, and they have their dedicated practitioners. So today's discussion is going to be often, hopefully, derived from practice-based experiences. And we'll be asking as well questions and maybe feedback from the audience to hear about your experience in this space. So I'd like to welcome our guests, our illustrious guests. I'm very happy to have them, actually, because Jeff Weiser, Rick Casteel, and Niclas Johansson. I know all of you in different capacities. Actually, Niclas, I don't think we've ever actually met face-to-face, but I certainly know about you because XR for work or VR for work initially. And then there was a transition we all made in terminology from V to X, which was painful, but I think we've managed to pass through that, and we've accepted the X. You guys were doing a lot of great work coming to my attention during the pandemic and the lockdowns, and kind of mirroring through different formats and different methods a lot of the research that we were doing in the XR Crowd through the Zero Events. So it's great to have you both here. And Jeff, of course, Rick introduced us last year, I think, at some point, because you were doing so much work. Yeah. Practically your work in VR, and then was sharing that experience around the world for those who, again, were getting quite interested in it. And I would say that probably at some point, what will come up, right, is at what point when we talk about working in VR, are we talking about a headset? Because I think when we all met and we all kind of started our respective journeys, when people said VR, generally speaking, there was a consistency in what was meant. But in the last year and then some months, right, the metaverse as a term has just kind of exploded and made an area that was already a little ambiguous, but at least practitioners knew what we were talking about, to being even a little bit more confused, because now there's I'm curious to see if it'll be metaverse for work at some point soon, if you guys will have to be forced into that nomenclature. But
make a note about that one, right?
But we're gonna hit on a lot of topics, and I think generally speaking, what I hope we address consistently, and again, the metaverse as a concept may come up in this context, is managing expectations. Managing expectations of people who are considering to work or companies who are making investments, and really just having an accurate vision as to what is possible and what the tools practically mean and should do. So without further ado, I'd like to give each of our speakers a chance to introduce themselves, if they a little bit in more depth than initially when we were going to the introductions. And I'd like to start off with Jeff. Jeff, would you mind just kind of walking us through for a few minutes your background and where you came from to get to here?
Sure, my pleasure. Hi, everybody. Jeff Weiser. I'm initially from Philadelphia, USA, but I've lived in Argentina for about 7 years, and I'm moving back there. Currently living in Ohio in the U.S. Whoops. Let me see if I can get back to my seat. There we go. these little things. So the way that I got here being in this space within this headset is really curiosity, boredom during the pandemic. I've was working, as I have been for the last 16 years, in translation language services. And I had a pretty boring remote job working for a company from DC. And so basically the people sitting right here have a lot to do with the journey after that, because start Googling VR for work. Is anybody working in VR? That was my question. And there I found Rick's video was like the first thing that popped up. I don't know if knew you were so well ranked and so many people at that time were seeing all your videos, but that's kind of like the first thing, content that I consumed to understand a little bit more what was going on in work for VR. I'd always kind of thought like one day we're going to be doing that. So yeah, the long story short, to give you who I am is and how I got here is I work in translation. I've lived in a few places around the world, got into VR through Rick's videos and Immersed, which later came through then. And I use it as just the medium. I work in language services. I love languages, but VR or the metaverse is a medium.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And now I'll turn it over to Rick. Just kind of going in and you guys sat down in the right order, actually, lining up with the poster.
Oh,
Look at that!
Didn't plan that at all. Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Rick Casteel. I actually recently retired from a 40-year career where I worked in healthcare. Started out as a clinician, a nurse actually, back in the 1980s. And then in the 90s got involved in IT when the EMRs, the electronic medical records, started to proliferate in hospitals. So I kind of agreed to help them temporarily by training nurses, and then I trained the lab, and then I trained radiology, and I trained the doctors. And by that point, they wouldn't let me go, so I ended up in IT for the rest of my healthcare career. And then about 4 years ago, I had gone to a trade show, one of those conferences we all go to a couple of times a year, and there was a booth in there because we also, I live in Maryland, very near a military complex or a base, and one of the vendors was there, and they had a HoloLens 1 and a Vive. And they were doing these demos, and I put that thing on my head, and I was just, I think a lot of us have this, light bulb moment where you're sitting there and you go, oh my God, this is going to be a thing, right? Something's going to happen with this. And, I think next month I went out on eBay and I found a Vive that somebody was getting rid of and bought that and started to experiment with it. And after you kind of get your feet wet and get tired of playing games, you're like, okay, well, what else can I do with this? Kind of like Jeff was saying. It's like, where else can I go? There's got to be some other more practical purpose for this. And I just started exploring these things, and I couldn't find many folks to engage with at the time over how it worked and what you would do with it. And so I just started recording my videos and putting them out there, like Jeff said. And that kind of brought people to me that, oh, hey, I saw your video, have you tried this and have you tried that? And then, in fact, that's how I found Michael, just, XR Crowd, let me see what they're doing there. And we started to connect a couple of years ago. And I started going to his events and just trying to figure out where the landscape was going. And then, partnered with Niclas in creating the XR for Work community in Facebook, and now do some consulting under the VR for Work consulting label. And so that's how I got here today. And again, so glad that you're here to share this with us, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick. And last but not least, Niclas, please, let's hear about your journey.
Sure. So my VR journey started in 2016. So I watched everything happen before then with the Kickstarter from 2012, Oculus. So I was on top of it. I got into it as soon as the tech was available, as an enthusiast and explorer, but also as a media entrepreneur. So I founded, together with a few partners in Sweden, the biggest Swedish website and community to centralize and organize all this, both in the form of articles. So we wrote, there's like 1,000+ articles about VR on our website, but also big public events. So the first thing we did in June 2016 was just gather together like 10 borrowed Vive sets and a few Gear VRs, 1 or 2 Oculus Rifts. And we managed to get 300 people into our modest venues, and it was just such a buzz. There were several Swedish startups in this space that met up and got the gist of it there. And we just sensed that, yeah, this is something worth sharing, worth spreading a light about. And so it went from there to doing more and more of these community meetups and tying the community together in Sweden, and also building the position with our articles as the knowledge expert, so to speak. And what happened was we got into services, so consulting and advising, because organizations contacted us, so we facilitated, we demoed, we onboarded teams, big and small organizations, in serious and not so serious applications of VR. So everything from board meetings and trainings to just VR for fun at a after work activity. So we did that.
Just dropped in to see what's happening over here. Oops, sorry.
And that led to me shifting my focus to to the international stage with XR for Work, where me and Rick are now building this community, but also central repository for this information about what tools to use. So we've still enthusiasts as we are. We're trying out pretty much everything we can get our hands on, and with the special focus of productive applications. So, that's the journey pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I mean, it's just funny how many of us have kind of a similar path, kind of discovering it and then discovering people like us in different places, or at least trying to, whether we find those people so easily in our geographic area, so we have to go online to go find those people. I'd like to kind of just kick off the focus discussion on the topic of where you think, from experience or from vicarious experience, what types of work really are appropriate for VR at the stage that we are now, in terms of the headsets and the tools that are available. And Jeff, I'd like to throw that first kind of to you, because I know from our past discussions before, you do a lot of your work in a headset, and I'd kind of like to understand a little bit more practically what is that work that you do? What does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So the way that I see it, the only change in how I work in the headset compared to how I worked outside of the headset is I have more people that I work with in the headset compared to outside of it. I'm still using a computer. I still sit at a desk with coffee, or just my computer and the space that I need to do to get done what I need on to get all of the work that I do has for so ever since 2015, when I moved to the U.S. back from Argentina. I've been working at my computer because translation services all are with relationships around the globe through the internet, of course. And so the only thing that's changed for me is I go in every day into a collaborative space where I'm able to not only build relationships, but also really important and strategic business partnerships. So that's how it has impacted me. Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that typing away on a keyboard, writing emails? Is it doing Zoom sessions in the headset, or is it meeting in spatialized environments? Is it lead generation or meeting with clients in a spatialized environment, or what is that? A little bit more.
All of that,
granular.
Yes. But specifically, what the richness that I find in it is the ability to have virtual coworkers. So I work in Immersed all day. Immersed is a VR app where you can connect your screens, and you can also have basically a co-working experience, right? And so just from being in the public co-working rooms there's not a huge community yet, but I hope it's going to be, right? But the amount of people there, that pass through, maybe 20, 30 people a day, some of them stick around, and we've become a really tight community. So I've met some of these people in person. Others, we're really excited to eventually meet in person. And I've hired people to do services for my company, and I've been hired by others to do translation for them. So that nucleus for me is it's the version of WeWork that we currently have in what is being termed the metaverse nowadays, because it is an economy and it is an immersive space, and several other definitions, things that go into that definition that we're starting to define it as.
Okay. And Rick and Niclas, just to follow up on Jeff's experience, what have you seen or what have you experienced yourself that you say this is really just a great work use case for a headset?
Niclas, you want to go first?
Yeah. So me personally, of course, I agree with Jeff. It's tremendous for personal flow inducing productivity use cases, and for meeting informatively and low intensity work in VR. What I've experienced in addition to that is the power of 3D creation through VR. So speaking with architects, with industry people from different kinds of manufacturing, from toy design to anything, and to teaching at an immersive experience creator school now, where the students are using VR tools like Shapes XR and Gravity Sketch to co-create in 3D in VR. And that's, of course, one of the first mind-blowing for most people experiences for most people in early VR was Tilt Brush, just the freedom to create spatially. So that, but in a professional sense, is really powerful. And also onboarding and scenario training for different. It could be like these soft skills training, or just introducing a person to a workplace where the workplace suddenly was an abstract thing during COVID. There is actually a place there we can meet eventually, or for some reason onboarding people who could not yet come to a workplace. So 360 experiences, but also interactive experience training people with for
it's like the
different
Walmart
scenarios.
and Accenture story, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Architects, but also any kind of public sector applications, both in healthcare, of course, which Rich knows a lot about, and healthcare training, right? But also school, libraries, just official administration type of trainings.
And then what I'll throw in there, Michael, that I've found is that I guess I'll start with kind of where I find the limitation with VR right now is that while you have your enthusiasts like Jeff and Paul who can work and do their work 24 hours a day, 8 hours a day in VR, that's still relatively rare. And I find that most efforts within VR now are very objective-based and episodic, right? There's a specific thing that you're going to go in, and there's a specific tool that does it very, very well. And so I like to use the example, we have Jeff here who works with After Now, and recently I worked with them, and we did a presentation talking about working in VR. And, it's like taking PowerPoint and put steroids in 3D, right, where you can get a group together and go through a presentation in a 3D environment. So that's great. Another tool that I like to use is Noda, which is this mind mapping tool, right? And it just brings you this really focused experience where you can really, I think, get your best ideation done. But I think what you end up running into all the time is this limit of, what do I do with it after I've done that thing, right? After I've done the presentation or after I've done the where can I take it and what can I do with it? And I think we're very used to, Michael, you and I were talking the other day on our desktops and PCs about being able to very efficiently and effectively multitask across different platforms. Mm-hmm. And I think, this is what Mural is trying to work out. Like, how do we extend beyond that one thing and allow people to get to multiple things while they've got a headset on?
I mean, that kind of ties into a lot of points that I think we're going to dive a little bit more into. But maybe to start with, it is let's go back to like the length, because as you mentioned, we've got a couple people here who are probably at the advanced levels of being able to persistently work comfortably and effectively in a headset. Actually, we had an event. It was one of our XR Crowd Zero events just maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago or something. And Rick, I know you were there, where we were meeting with researchers. This was an international team, but led out of the University of Coburg in Bavaria. This is the name of the article. It's publicly available. You can do a Google Scholar search for it. But what they did is they set up a rig, and they asked a group of people to do their regular job, which presumably was 99% email, and I think and maybe some vincing and such. And they sat there at a table for 8 hours, and they did this, and they kind of tracked how many times they took a break, how many times they looked away. And, long story short, their conclusion was, this is really a bad way to work. That was kind of in a nutshell their conclusion. And if you read into the report, or rather the design of the research, there's a lot of issues with the design of the research. And I think even more importantly, how they designed the research question. Because at least in our community, we're getting more towards this purposeful, like you're in a headset. You have to have a purpose that justifies wearing a headset, because no matter how comfortable the headset is, it's a little bit less comfortable than not wearing a headset. So the thing that you do in VR just needs to be a good reason to do it in VR. You have to think that, at least. And so you do that for bursts. And at least that was where our community is coming from, as not that everyone's like that, but probably most people, it would be better to do it in bursts. And these researchers were approaching it. And when we talked with them, the head researcher, who wasn't the one who actually conducted, but was the advisor for the younger researcher who led this, he told me that the motivation for this research, which was curious just to hear, was that everyone was talking about working in VR. Everyone was saying how we're going to work in the metaverse. And so the motivation was even coming rather specifically to counter the marketing, communicating the message that he felt was naive and it was not respecting the needs of the worker, which in fairness is probably true. It's marketing. I'm sure it was exaggerated. But so I'd like to kind of come back to Jeff and maybe the Paul in the audience even, who is also working a lot in VR. How do you balance when you're with other people and maybe you need to collaborate with the other people in VR? Maybe they have less endurance for it. How do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, so couple thoughts. First, I was listening to Rick and pondering the differences of how he works, how he utilizes VR to work on a regular basis compared to me. All the applications that he's mentioned, I think, are amazing, and I love using them. I personally haven't found a real room for those things outside of my computer for them to be really, really useful in my day-to-day or even kind of as staples of my work routine. Why? Why? Because I think a lot of these things are being designed for a future that we're almost at, right? We're almost at. I had a conversation with Brian from Noda, and I told him out flat out. I said, I love what you do. I can't use it because I need to be interfacing with people who are also mind mapping with my 2D stuff, and it's really difficult, right? In a computer, I think that we're in today's world, and so that's kind of the difference in terms of how the two of us work. And can I get you to repeat the question one more time so I don't get too far off the track?
Yeah, how do you balance, and maybe you're adding some additional context to it, how do you balance working with others who can't work in VR as long as you do?
Yeah.
Or maybe just can't, you do work with them, you're in VR, but they're not. Or they're jumping in and out, yeah.
And Jeff, you had to onboard 2 employees to VR.
I did. Yeah, I did. So I decided, when I started my company, now I own a small translation company that what we do is we focus and help other companies move into new markets, go to market translations and consulting. And so we had just 2 people that I'd hired kind of off the bat as soon as we were able to. And I decided to purchase headsets for them, one person in Argentina, the other person in Ireland. And it was really difficult to get them into VR. And it was like kind of this surprise for me as I learned through that process that the discomfort and even what's been described as the claustrophobia was just too much for them. It was too much for them. And so I was really just I guess I didn't at first have enough empathy for that because I was getting so much out of it and I saw so much good for us for collaboration, right? And so I wanted to make it a requirement, but I didn't want to force it. And so the in between that we found was, okay, look, if you're going to be working on your own, I'm not going to force you to do something uncomfortable. Like work on your own in your solo work time as you wish. But when we're going to collaborate on something, share screens, whatever it might be, then let's jump in and do some sort of a collaboration, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I've dealt with it. Is you can't force people. I learned you can't force people to get into a situation where they're working, where they're not comfortable, because they're going to hate their job. And like you said, that hurdle for me doesn't exist because I've figured out a way to get my head strapped in just the right, just the right amount of millimeters tight for my head, right? And I'm totally cool with it. And I know there's a tiny bit of pressure on my cheeks, but I'm fine with it all day, right? And I know that there's some eye strain, but I take my little breaks and whatever. So I've got enough around how I work to be able to facilitate these enormous advantages that I reap from it, which are the additional productivity from the technology and, like I mentioned before, primarily the social interactions, which I find extremely valuable as someone who considers themselves, quite a connector type.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just kind of right. Oh, it's so good, Niclas. Yeah, jump in here.
So I have 2 notes on this, which is goes together with what Jeff is alluding to, which is it can't be all or nothing. Like even if you yourself are 100% in this tech and thinking and doing it all the time.
Yeah.
On an organizational level, that just doesn't work for various reasons. So 2 different ways of onboarding organizations that we've used is one is just a fun activity, which makes it a social event, and you're at a workplace or at a physical event, and you're just taking turns going in for really short sessions of one song of Beat Saber or a minute in Richie's Plank experience or something like that. So super high intensity stuff, but you're just in and out. And for some people, even that can give them a nope, this is not for me, and that has to be okay at that moment. It's just casual, light-hearted fun. So and then you can come back to that team, to that organization, and say, okay, how could we ramp up from this taste of it to something more serious, to something more productive, gradually. The other way that we've tried with many clients now is events, which is virtual events happening in Altspace or in similar platforms, could be engaged as well. From an hour or 2 to a full day, like the main company event of the year, and it could be organizations as small as 10 people and as large as a couple of hundred, and then we can handle the logistics of like sending out headsets to people, renting them to them, giving them very good instructions and onboarding for just setting up their accounts and whatever. And very importantly, always providing a non-VR channel into the same event. Like Altspace has a desktop app. You can use that. Workrooms has a call-in video call feature. Use that. So there's always a non-VR fallback.
That ability to bridge.
Yeah, so people can, like this, the event can happen in VR and you can participate, but not necessarily from VR. I think, and doing it all, again, like one time, high intensity, do plenty of evaluation and following up afterwards to see how, what's the interest in like long time adoption after this, and what are the, like, it opens up the discussion. And that's pretty much what we learned with our first big event with the 300 people. Like, there are just so many ideas that come up for people when they first try it. So let it happen more organically by just throwing them in and then taking them up again.
You know, that's a good point. And Michael, just to reflect a little bit about what these guys are saying from a historical perspective, and I come from that because, you know, this gray is not just with my avatar. But I was there when we made this transition in healthcare and put computers out in nursing units. And I mean, we literally had nurses leave and retire because there wasn't a way, like Niclas is suggesting, to bring them on board, you know, onboard them into this new experience in a pleasant way, right? You know, they could not make that psychological mental leap, you know, to this transition from paper to digital. And I think we have an equivalent here where, you know, everybody sitting here is very used, you know, I put this thing on every day. I don't even think about it anymore. And I move around, but then I got my wife a headset and it's like, hey, let's go bowling. And she's like, I don't know how to pick the ball. How do I get the ball, you know? And when do I let go when I throw it? And, you know, a lot of frustration build up, and then they don't want to do it anymore. And what a lot of these platforms have not done well is an onboarding experience. You know, I think one of the biggest things, you know, the platform Jeff uses a lot, Immersed, they did a fantastic job very recently on an onboarding experience now for their new users that's really valuable. But a lot of places are so heads down on development that they're not taking care of getting new users comfortably involved in using the platforms.
I mean, it's interesting that you're kind of coming back to this fundamental question of getting people to adopt something that they're not interested in adopting. You know, it is how do you get people to do something that if you ask them straightforward, they would say, I'd rather not do it. And I think the analogy of but yeah, what is it? What was it?
The nurses going using
records,
the computers.
EMR. You know, I was working. I was working in a doctor's office because my family comes from that background, and during that, and you know, I think what you're alluding to is something I start to talk about when it comes to VR is that there's a generational element here. You'll always find these enthusiasts and these early adopters all throughout it, but when seniority is a factor. When you have something to lose, you're threatened by needing to replicate a proficiency in a new environment where even simple proficiencies require some just time. You know, you can explain it a million times, but you have to practice it. The question is, what kind of company do if you feel like the future of your business is remote, and VR is going to be a core element to that because of the way you manage, if nothing for no other reason. Is it something that you can do with your senior levels of your workforce, or is it something you actually have to do with the incoming? Like for Accenture, I would love to understand, like, what's that demographic? What are the demographic descriptors of their workforce adoption? How many of it is at the higher levels, and how many of it is at the lower levels?
It's a good question. I wonder if anyone has that info.
Question to adopt this email. We had the issue with email because they knew our CEO had her secretary print her email out. So everybody else went, why am I going to use email? I'm sorry, audience.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to talk about the Accenture thing. So their primary use case is onboarding remote employees. So it's not even so much one demographic versus another. It is a line of old employee versus new employee, and they've got old employees who pre-existing employees who are interested in and engaging with the technology, and then for anybody who is coming on board now in their very remote workforce, very large workforce, they're encouraging the use of VR because they're using it in a very, as you would say, Rick, a very episodic, very focused way for what VR is good for. I agree with the conclusions of this paper. That is a horrible way to work. What they did is they handcuffed somebody and gave them a terrible screen. This is not an effective configuration at all. But where it is effective, we have people here from Belgium to Argentina, right? We have an enormous spread of people who are co-present, and that feeling of co-presence gives us or expands on the innate sense of spatialization that humans use as part of their memory. We use it for navigating physical space, but also creating maps, creating memories associated with those maps. We use space to think as part of how we engage, and we absolutely use that space to connect with other people. So Accenture is using it for the new folks to connect with other people in a co-present way despite distance, so that they can feel associated with and connected to other people inside of the workforce that they're joining.
We definitely have alluded to, but what I'd like to ask is, what do you think needs to happen either at the hardware or at the software level? What should be the priorities for the creators of the tools that we're working with to make it more accessible, or to make it more effective, or to just create more value for, if it's even just people in VR working with people who aren't in a headset? What are some of these priority things that we need to see develop?
Well, in my opinion, I mentioned it before and say it again. It's a time of transition, that there's a lot right in front of us that we need to be able to do right now that still isn't really working well. And namely, I think it's really two areas. One area with two parts: comfort in terms of being able to just wear the device and have it on for a long period of time, and comfort for the eyes, because it's a very visual experience. But you have to account for, not everyone wants to be looking at something so close to them for so long. But by some estimations, if we had kind of double the resolution of what we have today, which is quite an ask, but referring to the Quest 2, for example, then we should be able to have a viewing experience that is comfortable for most people. So I really think that the comfort and also the bridge to what we do today. So again, I spend most of my time working on my computer within VR, which is absolutely not necessary to work on my computer. It does so much more for me in VR for many reasons, and that's why I do it. But for most people, that's not going to work because it doesn't look good enough for them, and it's not comfortable for long enough for them. So yeah, comfort.
And what I'll add to what Jeff's saying, which I think is also very foundational, right? If you can't get them to get a headset on or feel comfortable in that, then you've already lost, right? So all those things have to happen. And then for me, it's also about the tool sets. I have to feel like I can do things better and more efficiently in the headset, or I don't have the motivation again to go there. If it's an extra step, or if it's other layers, or there are impediments to getting things done where I could do them on my desktop kind of faster and easier, again, I'm losing that battle. And I think those of us that are working in there are kind of dealing with it, and we find shortcuts, and again, we're pretty adept, so we can work around things. So we make it work. But I think, again, your average person, your average worker won't put up with that when they know they can be more comfortable or have the tools that they need to get things done quicker, at a laptop or a PC. Niclas, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah. So of course, there's lots of progress to be made, both in hardware and software. It's still such an early technology, and so many problems to solve with this technology. So where to start because I mean, maybe we're all still hoping for the iPhone moment of XR. And maybe some of us have even given up that hope because it's been since 2016. It's been 6 years, and we don't see like a huge quantum leap into mainstream, especially not for productive purposes. So I would address a couple of things in first in software, which is the integration of our current workflows and devices and hand off between where we are, especially with the phone. Like, how can we more organically bring in, we're like on foot, we're doing things on our phone, and then we put on our headset when we can come home, or we sit at the computer first. Like, how can these modes of digital interaction be more organically intermingled? I think that's crucial, and I think that's what many hope that Apple will bring a lot of the table in, because they always have a big integration between their whole ecosystem and all the components. So I think that's the biggest thing in software. In hardware, I think that we haven't found the native interaction device for VR yet. I mean, the hand controllers, sure, but they are pretty clumsy when it comes to fine interactions and in particular text input. If you ever tried the virtual keyboards and 2-finger typing there, so text input and more like fine interactions. I think that the most interesting track I see there hardware-wise is the EMG neural wristbands, which promise to give us a whole new paradigm of how to input stuff and interact with stuff. I think that you really need to reinvent how digital interaction works, and that's interesting for that. And also realistic avatars, because so much is about co-presence with other people. And I think that the Quest Pro with the face tracking and better animated avatars will be a huge step in that direction. But I also think that even in still pictures, we need to look more like ourselves in VR.
I have one more thing to say about that, and that's that, I was just thinking, VR started to get popular with gaming, and we all know that still, if I'm not mistaken, that's by far the greatest usage of VR. And there's a reason for that, because it's an engaging activity that people really, really want to do together. And they want to do it together so much that I think even most people that are really into VR gaming do it with a cable connected, even still today. So, I mean, that's quite interesting when you think about it, because that's extremely uncomfortable. For me, that was the barrier. I was like, why would I want to be strapped into like my wall while I'm using a headset all day? And I think that when we get that a compelling enough reason that's linked to money, that's economically based, we're going to see a flood of people coming into VR for work and productivity. Because then it's not going to matter how comfortable it is. It's not going to matter if you have to squint a little bit. You're going to go in because it's this human need to move up the Maslow's hierarchy to where you want to get next.
It sounds a bit apocalyptic, right? We were talking about something before, and I was thinking oftentimes that for me the point where a lot of the concerns about VR become, I think, legitimate concerns is when consent is reduced or taken out of the equation, and the idea that I've got to get that money, and that money's in there. So to your point, like, it doesn't matter if it's uncomfortable. It reminds me of a conversation I had with the guy who is, I guess, in charge of the HoloLens programming in Europe. I met him at a conference in France, and I was talking to him about this new headset from Lynx that I thought, wow, I think it's the best mixed reality device on the market until Quest Pro or 3 comes out, right? And I think it's, quite potentially a risk for HoloLens because it's European. So, in the European market, everything is enterprise. And he just said, no, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. We don't care about that because they don't have Office. So, of course, people will get HoloLens because HoloLens could be a brick, but they'll still buy it because we have Teams and we have Office. And it's kind of to your point, like to some extent, like there's a certain compulsion, which isn't always about what's the best user experience. But I think all of you, for me, are kind of just leading to my follow-up question. Well, final question, then we'll throw something for the audience who's still with us, is do we think more people will be working in VR when there's more economy in VR? So it makes sense. Instead of trying to do this stuff in the metaverse, do the stuff in the metaverse or in VR and then take it out into the real world. Wasn't it so much easier if we just keep it in something of the context in which we made it?
I think that the question is shifting. It's not whether we're going to be doing the work in VR, but we have to bring in the word metaverse at this point because the VR at this point becomes just one medium, maybe in some cases the best medium through which to experience immersive experiences. So I think, yes, there are going to be more people in VR for that reason. And I think there's being a language professional, this has kind of come recently to me in simple terms because I did another presentation recently on working in the metaverse for translators. I had to think about terminology, right? And I started to realize that our co-working group in Immersed, when we're trying to see who's going to meet up, we don't say, "Hey, I'll be online in an hour," right? We don't do that. We don't say, "I'll be on soon." It's "I'll be in," right? I'll be in the space lounge pretty soon. I'll be in the cafe. So our terminology has shifted already, and that's kind of part of what the metaverse is about: being inside of an economy, of social experiences, of all the other definitions that I think you can hear best from Matthew Ball in his recent book. That's what's going to bring us more into VR because people are going to want greater immersion. But I think that before that really goes too deep, we're gonna have that immersion in other ways, maybe even more on mobile, maybe even more on PC, maybe even more through some sort of simple AR that has yet to come out.
I think, Jeff, to add on to what you're saying, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's going to take, Michael, more than me just being able to kind of go to the office in VR. And again, I always use air quotes when I say the term metaverse, but I think companies are going to have to provide information and services beyond just, hey, go do your email or, these documents. Can I put my headset on and find somebody that's in the HR department? Can I put my headset on and get an appointment with administration? Can I put my headset on and get, again, something done because services are being provided, or there's something that's driving me into the headset that I'm going to get out of being in the headset, more than, again, that I can check my email.
Absolutely.
Niclas, any thoughts?
Yeah.
The metaverse is even harder to speculate about than XR technology, and I prefer not to.
Okay.
If anything, I think that replicating the 2D digital interactions that we already do, like when we're talking about office work, like what are the other kinds of 2D digital interactions that we can bring into this 3D space instead of the real physical space, like watching movies, like playing games together. How can there be an economy around that? Like where is Netflix in the metaverse? Because there is a Netflix app, but they haven't updated since 2017.
Well, they use big screen, I guess, right? Don't they have a deal with big screen or something?
They should, but no.
Well, that's my buddy Miguel from Netflix, who I see every day in Immersed. He can tell you he's pulling Netflix into VR. So.
Yeah.
And I think as you see these partnerships, like we heard about with Meta and Microsoft, Michael, that to me was a big moment in Connect when you start to see these work products that are now starting to be, and right now it just said optimized, right? So again, am I just doing a Word document in VR and it looks and acts just like a Word document on my desktop? Again, what's the draw there? Is it just a preference thing? But if I can work on it with Niclas or work on it with Jeff, and we're in the same space, even though we're both remote, maybe that's the secret sauce that makes that work.
Just to kind of build a little bit more on that last question and some of the thoughts you guys shared, I think what I heard from Niclas even, the idea of bringing in the 2D interactions, what more 2D interactions can we do in the metaverse? I think that's a fundamental question or a fundamental division in how people see these technologies. Are they meant to be replicants to the best that they can be, a replication of what we already enjoy or we already like? Or often this question of, is it something different, something we maybe haven't seen, but we're hoping some designer really unlocks this thing that we haven't asked for. We're just hoping that they discover something. And I think for me, that kind of boils back down to the question, if working in VR is meant to be a better form of the work that we've already been doing, that's just a very high bar, because we've got so many decades of investment in optimizing, more widely distributed tools. If there's something about experience in VR that just makes a lot more sense to make it in VR, to do that work, to produce that service or experience in VR, then maybe that's, I think of theater. If you do immersive theater, you really need to be in the headset as much as possible with the other people, because you just have to understand what that set looks like and how you perform. And so that's obviously the economy is not there for that to be very widespread or even sustainable. But I think that's an example of immersive theater requires working in VR and rewards it. But what other types of economies exist or will exist in the near future that will justify people putting on the headset and doing that work in there? Yeah, please, sir.
Tom.
Yeah, I've got a question for the panel. Are any of y'all going to get the Quest Pro?
We didn't even talk about that. It's crazy. Definitely.
I'm waiting for the doorbell to ring as we speak.
Oh man,
nice. What are you most looking forward to?
The mixed reality elements of it, and it was interesting. I really was listening when Jeff was talking about getting his new folks to put the headset on and the claustrophobic feeling, and I'm very anxious to kind of see how this mixed reality, where I can bring in work while I can still see my real environment. I'm one of these who feel like we should be able to have the headset as a laptop replacement, right? I should be able to go and just have my headset. And so if I'm thinking $1,500 for the headset, well, that's what my last laptop cost. Maybe that's not such a leap anymore. But the proof will be in the putting it as it is in the partnerships and what Meta's able to bring to the table in terms of that work effort using that kind of headset, right? They want to say it's a enterprise type headset. So what will make it an enterprise type headset?
Yeah, for me, I'm looking forward to being slightly more comfortable at work, because even though I've made it comfortable and I don't care that it's a little bit of weight on my head. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It'd be nice to have for 8 hours a day something a little bit lighter. And this seems like such a small thing, but for what I find important at work, facial gestures are actually going to be a big change. I know that not everybody's going to have those to look at me, but knowing that I'm expressing myself more clearly in my interactions in VR wherever possible is really important. I'm really interested to see how PokerStars VR changes now.
Can you keep that poker face, Jeff?
Yeah.
If I can follow up on that, Jeff, for you, just because you do so much work and you do so much co-working around others without those facial expressions, are you concerned at all that, with it coming back, it might be, you're not intentionally expressing what you want to. I mean, now it has to be explicit, right? You have to really say what it is that you want. And you can, to some extent, if you're readjusting the mask or whatever, you're making a face. No one sees that. But are you ever thinking about like the idea that you'll go back to unconscious expression? And maybe that's something that, because you work so much in the headset without it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think it's, we have the option, I think that you can't take the option away of turning it off, right? From now on, it's going to be, you have full control over how you look, you have full control over how you express, and that's going to have to be how it is, right? So I don't think, I don't see another path, right? I see it that if I want to be expressive, I'm going to have to flip that switch and be expressive. And if I want to play poker, I'm probably going to want to switch it off. I mean, I think that's how it's going to be. Me personally, I'm a pretty open book type person. So I would like almost all the time, even if, let's say, one interaction doesn't work in my favor, that I grinned a certain way, then fine, whatever. Overall, I believe that, by expressing me as me, it's going to be better. I don't judge people that prefer to be more reserved, but that's just how I am.
Mm-hmm. Has anyone been in Glue, or a platform that has, because Engage doesn't have this, and Altspace might have a little bit of it, right? But they have the somewhat procedurally generated facial expression, so that your face isn't a blank canvas. Does anyone have any thoughts about that in a productive environment? Because I often have wondered, it's more pleasant to look at. We had a great experience in Glue a year and a half ago for like 2 hours, and it was just a lot of fun, really satisfying, really engaging conversation. But then in the back of your mind, if you kind of are aware that, and how much did this algorithmic expression contribute to my satisfaction with that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that Workrooms is also very good at making the faces more animated, less static. And Glue, I only tried before, like a couple of avatar revisions ago, so I haven't. I mostly recognize the eye contact mechanism they have in there. But for Workrooms, I do think that, they have several things going for them. With the spatial audio is like bar none the best in VR in that specific app. And just the latency of the audio, but also the animatedness of the avatars, even without face tracking. I think it makes it a lot more fun and memorable. Yeah.
True.
If we have, just to kind of, this is an interesting, from the psychology degree in me, if you can turn on and off expressions, would you want to have a middle ground? Would you want to have active face but not facial tracking?
What would that look like? I don't know if I understand.
It would look like what we have now with the procedurally generated, algorithmically generated facial expression. So the alternative being like a static face, or it is expressive, but it's not my facially tracked expressions. It's just, some fodder to keep someone looking at me and enjoying that.
There could also be one more option could be to have a slider for the translation of your real time. So can you like settle down my real expressions and make me less animated? My micro expressions into bigger expressions. That could be interesting too.
Yeah, I agree with that. That would be the way to do it.
But to what extent would you want the other person to know? Right? And I guess we probably would say yes. If you're going to exaggerate my expressions, the other person should know, because this can be a way of improving your performance, right? If in a work context or some type of professional context, or even just a trust-based context.
Interesting design choice, right? So if an app does let the receiver know, but I don't like that, right? If I want to hide that, then I might not have such an inclination to use that app, right? So I think that's a really interesting question you bring to the table, because that will change the app design a lot. User UI design.
Well, it brings a whole new dynamic. in when Michael, you and I are having a conversation, and you notice some sort of indicator, above my head, that I turned my emotion damper on, and you got to go, what is Rick hiding from me right now? Right. But you don't know that it's because the dog is like just peed on my leg or something, right? And
it's funny, like an emotional mute button.
Or even, one of the areas that I wanted to study in my research that I just have not seen done, admittedly, in a platform is, and we were talking about this, I think maybe in a previous conversation, Rick, or maybe I mentioned it, but you both remember, right, Rick, you were saying, how tall am I, right? Mm-hmm. And earlier today, and the thing is, right, there's plenty of research that suggests that height plays a role in human interaction, certainly in issues of competition and stuff, and I've often thought, wouldn't it be such a great platform if I always, in my experience, appeared to be the tallest? Would it give me more confidence? But would I pay extra so that everybody else saw me as the tallest? And assuming they didn't know me in real life. Like, these types of subtle but very simplistic things, when we're in a mediated reality, we have so much trust that what we see, we all see. But there's no reason, that's just trust. Right. There's nothing inherently that requires that.
Well, and some of these interesting experiments that people have done, even with genders, right, being very different genders. Yeah. And Raphael's not here; he's left, but he posted something the other day. This woman actually did a study about your avatar and what it says about you, and what that social context all means. She did a TED Talk, kind of thing on it, and it was really fascinating. It was really well done. But yeah, I think this whole question about how we represent each other is also going to be something that drives people. I think that alone could drive certain people to work in VR. Right? Paul had mentioned, his disability, and I have some chronic pain issues too that I deal with. But you can represent yourself in a very different manner that I think can make a difference to an employer or to somebody that you're dealing with, just from an empathy perspective, or from being on the same ground perspective. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting psychology there to be studied, Michael.
I would like to thank everyone who attended it, who will then be watching this later because we were recording this session, and especially I would like to thank our guests, our speakers. Thank you very much, all three of you, for spending so much of your time. The sofa, I know, isn't the most comfortable, so I appreciate that you guys kept such proper posture the whole time.
It's not bad.
And,
not bad.
Yeah, so on that note, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day or evening or morning, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks for hosting, moderating the panel.